Welcome back, everybody, to Two Guys and a Stack of Comics. My name is Reed. Along with me, as always, is Mike. Mike, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing good, Reed. How are you?
I am doing good. Here to talk about one of my favorite comic book characters and probably the most divisive character in comic books and has been for a long time. And that it sort of seems like the writers for this character either come from the fanboy approach of they love the character or the antagonistic, they hate the character and everything he represents sort of angle. There's been some who have towed the line really well. I think Mike Barron in the original first couple Punishers issues did a really good job of just portraying the character differently. But I would say, really, the last 20 or so years, it's really gone into very weird territory with the Punisher. And so we're going to talk a little bit about why we think the character works, what do we think the character's role is within Marvel, and kind of how he's become the flashpoint for realism in comic books and just sort of an examination on his role and why people perceive him so weirdly. So, Mike, I know you're not a mega fan of the character by any stretch. You know of him, you have an awareness of him. I know you and I have always talked about how I read a lot of Punisher comics. You're not the biggest fan, but you have your respect and appreciation for the character. So
I
I think you can
do.
kind of bring an interesting thing to this. When I just say the character of the Punisher, Frank Castle, what comes to mind for you about him and his role in comic books?
I think that some version of the Punisher was always floating around in the back of all of our minds, and most importantly, the creatives of the second generation that came to start working in comics in the late 60s and in the 70s. And those folks, probably always wondered, they grew up in the 50s and started working, building towards their career in comic books in the late 60s and 70s. And that was a really strange time for comics because on the one hand, you had your superheroes like Batman and Superman in these zany sci-fi stories, domesticated issues like with Superman and Lois and all this kind of strange stuff. Then in the 60s, Marvel, burst out with their group of superheroes after, of course, DC floated the idea in 56 and had some success in the 50s and into 1960 with all that. So superheroes came back into the forefront, and these creatives that started working in the big two, I think all of them had this idea floating in the back of their mind, like these superheroes are too friendly, the villains are too villainous,
Yep.
and why don't they? They're strong, they're powerful, they could just kill them, get rid of them. They keep getting out of jail, like the prison system is a mess. The
Yep.
Joker gets out. You know
Joker
what's
being out of Arkham and killing another 50 people thing. Yeah.
yes, and so why doesn't somebody just put these guys down? Where's the death penalty? But Batman, of course, has the no kill rule, and Superman, and so it's kind of gloves off. Spidey, I don't think Spider Man ever killed anybody. Um,
Maybe they've had him once and it was like Wolverine tricked him into it or something.
yeah,
But
and
yeah.
so you know, some version of Frank Castle was floating around in all of our minds, like, yeah, you should just get rid of him once and for all. But of course, we need more stories, so the Joker has to get out again, and this whole thing has to start over again. So lo and behold, Spider-Man 129, somebody
Jerry
throws
Conway, right? Yeah.
yeah, Tim Conway. They throw that Jerry Conway. They throw that character in, and then he kind of goes dormant for a while, 15 years or so. He had a few appearances, and then the 80s happened,
Gets a
and
solo series in '87. Yeah.
it was all it was all on, like, for people to take this character where they would. Of course, they've taken him to some very dark places. But I did watch a few of the episodes of the Netflix series. It was really well done. It was great. It was very dark, very violent, of course, but that is the Punisher. And there's a part of human nature where you like, these. the villains in this world are terrible. We should, some part of us wants to mete out ultimate justice, and that's where the character comes in.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I always liked the character because I always thought he was kind of the flip side, dark side version of Batman. As far as what would a Batman who decided I'm just going to permanently take out the trash be? I think, like you said, he was an inevitable reaction to comic books, and there are people who have always been, as much as there's a fictional world, you read them and you go, why doesn't someone just put a bullet in the Riddler or the Joker or whoever else, right? Marvel, the Kingpin, Bullseye, etc., right? And I think you can have fascinating debates about, Daredevil won't kill Bullseye, and then Bullseye comes back and kills Elektra and kills Karen and kills all these people, right? I think where the Punisher works best is when he is that wild card in stories. And I think he works best as in the Marvel universe, they always kind of used to have a cool thing of the X-Men were kind of by themselves, taking care of mutant problems and taking care of evil mutants. The Avengers were dealing with your global, grand scale. Kang's trying to reset the timeline while Loki goes and gets power gems or whatever kind of issues. The Fantastic Four are dealing with the space-time continuum. And you had your street level guys. You had your Luke Cages, your Daredevils, your Moon Knights. And the Punisher was, hey, there's drug dealers probably in the Marvel universe. There's,
Yeah.
terrorists in the Marvel universe. There's people that the Punisher mobsters, right? That he was taking care of. And I loved that examination of this not necessarily costume superhero, but what would a guy in the universe where we're just cool with people running around in costumes, what would he do? If he just thought, hey, I can kind of take that shtick and make it my own, just a little more brutal. I think the reason the Punisher has become such a junk character now is that the writers all have an agenda with him. I think you either get people who I think Garth Ennis has written some really good Punisher comic books, but at the same time, Garth Ennis absolutely disdains and hates superheroes.
He
And
does.
and so those comics, while good, he'll do a lot of things. His Max series that is more set on just Frank Castle, kind of his own universe, is a little different. But whenever Garth Ennis would write anything where the Punisher would encounter Wolverine or anyone like that, you can tell there's a personal agenda, and I'm going to use Frank Castle as the way to embarrass these characters I don't like. I think
Right.
on the flip side, we have seen writers who don't like Frank Castle, who, hey, I'm going to put him in the comic book so he can look like crap. And I can, hey, if you're a fanboy of the Punisher, I think you're an idiot. And so I'm going to write that into it. And so he's become this character without a tether because he's completely at the whims of people who see him in radical opposition to each other. And it's so weird to see this character take this on because I don't know why he is so controversial. And that we're okay with this character existing in almost every other medium, period. And what's
Yep.
funny is if you told me, hey, superheroes in comic books for kids, and so a character like the Punisher, we have to have a strong stance against because for kids, we need to illustrate that it's wrong to have guns and go do this thing. Okay. But Marvel and DC have long been adults only companies that push children out of the way and don't care. So the big
Yeah.
thing is, I don't want to hear any moral high grounding of why the Punisher sucks when they'll gleefully show the Joker murdering thousands of people in these comic books and still put Joker crap out there all the time. I
Yeah.
think that's where this starts to get stupid with the Punisher is they have picked him as this one character that they have an issue with, and it's like, why are we okay with John Wick and the Man with No Name and everyone Han shot first with Han Solo? Like, we're okay with people with guns in almost any other situation in movies because we're smart enough to know John Wick's not a real human being.
Yeah.
And yet with the Punisher, because some people have put his logo on guns and soldiers and people have really become fans of the character, we act like he can't exist in the Marvel universe without having to say something about the character. And I think that is why so many of his stories of late come across as just either really anti Punisher, anti his fans, almost published out of spite or to the point where it's like, okay, you just hate superheroes. And I think that has, in a sense, been the biggest loss for the character in that he was a brilliant wild card. Like, I don't really like the comic book Civil War because of what it did to Iron Man. But one of the coolest thing was when they had the Avengers and Cap and Spider-Man and they're on the run and they're having and Punisher's joining them and you see them having to create alliance with this character they normally don't work with. And I
Yeah,
believe it's in that comic. There's a brilliant line from Spider-Man in there. I think it was Mark Millar who wrote it, where Spider-Man sees the Punisher and Captain America arguing, and he was like, "Oh, they're like the same guy. They're just from different wars." Because Cap's out of World War II and Frank's out of Vietnam at that time.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so that was a cool examination. I wish they would have done more with that. I just feel like they can't get past the agenda piece with him now. And it's really ruined his place, like you said, because he is such a natural question you'd ask of,
yeah,
okay, what if Spider-Man just got tired of the Green Goblin screwing up his life every other year and just
yeah,
was like, that's it, no more. Right. I think what's interesting we have with the Punisher now is because comics have gotten so dark, their complaints about Frank don't make sense anymore.
right.
Because
Because look
and
at
what
Wolverine.
because DC's been very different in terms of typically your standard DC hero approaches it as I don't kill. I would say for the most part, Batman, Flash, Green Lantern. Yes, there's exceptions. I'm sure people can pull random issues and panels of where they have, but basically for the most part, your standard DC Comics Justice League member does not kill. Right. If it is, it's more of a Superman is fighting Doomsday, and literally, unless Superman kills him, the guy's going to destroy the whole planet, kind of thing. Or Wonder Woman's fighting an evil god who will level a whole society and
Right.
has to kill. Marvel is interesting in that outside of Daredevil and Spider-Man, we pretty much have where the heroes kill. Captain America kills. Iron Man kills. Thor kills. The X-Men have turned into gleefully wiping out their enemy by the dozen of
Yeah.
late. And so it's so strange in this Marvel universe where like Wolverine will show up and the Avengers and Spider-Man are high-fiving him like, yeah, man, that guy's awesome. Deadpool's a mercenary who kills people for money. They'll
Yeah.
team up with him, no business. But Frank Castle shows up and it's like, oh, evil guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Too
It's
much.
too much. It's too
Too
much.
real. Can't deal with it. And I think that is where, to me, at least it strikes me, comic books getting dark and loving the Watchmen tone and that stuff, but then also simultaneously having this huge issue with the Punisher is just stupid. It just shows such hypocrisy. Do you kind of think that's where that is as well? Or why do you think that divide kind of exists where Wolverine slashes a guy? That's awesome. And then I know people could say, well, because guns are real and metal claws are not, but I think you're just getting into different things there.
Yeah, it's just two different sides of the same coin. I think that the darkness of comics has gone as dark as it can possibly go. And I think it's kind of reached a limit. And I think societally, we're just we're 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 coming to a reckoning with our violence. And comic books is a medium that often, kind of reflects the tone of what we like to consume as our escapism. And I think, Frank Castle is just represents a lot of rage because what happened to him and his origin story and how he goes to take care of business, But he was a character that was often in the old west stories of the movies, the
Mhm.
gunslinging mercenary who handled, justice with his, shotgun or his, uh, pistols.
Oh, basically, every Clint Eastwood role of all
Yeah,
time is
yeah,
the old West version of the Punisher.
yeah. And then Dirty Harry came out in the 70s,
Yep.
and then there was the Charles Bronson. What was his one? I
Oh,
forget.
Death Wish. Yeah,
Death
those two. Yeah.
Wish. So it's in our mental lexicon. But I really feel, and now that Disney owns Marvel, I really feel, yeah, and I wish things would go back, to the way they were, where you had this one character who was an outlier, and that made him interesting. But I do feel that people have glommed on to that, and sadly, some people really try and emulate that in the real world. And I think it's just a misfortune of the character, the placement, and the times where we've gone really dark. And, this character is always there because it's part of our human psyche. And, like I said, this character was inevitable to come out in that second generation of talent that came forward in the late 60s and the early 70s. And, and I think that corporate media and the people working in the corporate media world, which comic books is, part of, but, like they said, Idea Farm, they probably, you know, don't want to portray that. And you and I did a video a while back where it's really been kind of a hit job on this character, just to put him out of the way for now. And it's unfortunate, but what's cool is, the Punisher comes back, and, last week he was on TV. Guess what? You can't get rid of him.
It is such a weird thing to have a character that on the comic book side they seem to have such disdain for, and then at the same time he's portrayed by an actor who just knocks it
Oh,
out of the
it
park
was awesome,
playing the
right?
character. And what's so weird is Daredevil, the TV show. And we've been talking about that show a lot lately. The Greatest Examination of the Punisher was that incredible episode where him and Daredevil are on the roof talking.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that clearly the show wants you to side with Matt,
Yeah.
but it showed where someone like Frank Castle, as you said, is inevitable. That
Yeah.
that is, especially in the world of costume superheroes. And I think that there was that great part where, Daredevil and him are talking, and Matt's like, do you ever think, like, when you kill someone, he's like, what do? You jump around and act like it's a playground in your little pajamas and stuff. And it was such a great interaction between these characters. And what I think has gotten ridiculous with the Punisher, like you said, look, I do think there is a violence issue in the world, period. Right? As a Christian myself, I don't want to see anybody die for any reason whatsoever. Because I think we're all created by God, and that's a personal thing I have. I don't want to see anybody bite the bullet ever. But I think we have to start getting to where it's fiction. It's fiction. Like, what's so weird to me with the Punisher is simultaneously the Jack Reacher television show on Amazon is seen almost universal acclaim for being
Yeah.
a great show. That is a man who ignores laws, who takes out his enemies brutally, and he does it with his own sense of honor and code of justice. I don't see anybody being like, well, we really shouldn't let this Reacher show be a big thing because sending the wrong message, right?
Yeah.
John Wick mowing down people by the hundreds in those movies. I
Yeah.
don't see anybody like real world violence. Did John Wick inspire this? No, it's a freaking fictional character. And I
Yeah.
think, yes, the Punisher crossed over a little bit where his symbol got put on shirts and guns and things with people who took that too far. But to associate that with the characters the same way of like, look, in the early 90s, there were people running around in Raiders jerseys doing awful things. And we didn't sit there and go, oh, the Raiders are bad. Like, people adopt stupid logos at times or adopt logos and use it as a unifying thing to sit there and say, well, we really got to grapple with how he is. 'Cause it's a fictional character. And the thing is, when you decide we need to address this, you give all of the people who are using that logo in a way you don't like, you give them credence, you give them legitimacy. You're doing exactly what you'd want them to do. It's like,
Yeah.
for me, I think it's completely, look, the military having an appreciation for Frank Castle, I have zero issue with. He's a fictional character. Military is a different role. They have a different mindset every single day about what they have to do. I'm not going to pass a judgment on that. And if they have some symbol that they think is unifying for them, I'm not going to pass judgment. Cops in different figures. I don't know that I need a cop wearing a Punisher outfit. That's a little much given what their role is, right? But
I was only
I
going
think,
5 miles an hour over the speed limit,
yeah,
officer.
right. And so I think what they've tried to do is they have tried to think, well, we got to address the fact that some politicians like him and that some real world figures like him. And it's like, no, by doing that, you immediately out validate. If your whole goal was to shut those people down, by examining, you validate it. And if you
Yeah.
just had written the character as he should be, as just this wild card in the Marvel universe, it would be
Yeah.
different. And again, I think what's funny to me about comic books is they're the reason the Punisher got so dark and got adopted by so many of those people is you wanted to take this medium to realism. We used to have more fun. We used
Yeah.
to have more colorful pages. We used to not have depressing comic books. I mean, and granted, I think it's a masterpiece of storytelling, one of my favorite comics of all time. But Watchmen, Daredevil Born Again, The Dark Knight Returns, some of those are amazing. But when you look at Stan and Bill Everett and those guys when they created Daredevil, an issue where Karen is a drug addict who sells Daredevil's identity for another hit of drugs, and that gets back to the Kingpin, is probably not what Stan had in mind when he created lovable secretary Karen Page, right?
Yeah.
When comic books were created, I don't know that Alan Moore's examination of heroism, like it was in The Watchmen, and what would this be, was ever the intent of any of the Ditko, Lee, Kirby type of people. This generation of creators who wants to critique that stuff so much is the reason the Punisher gained the poppy because you took the medium where it was. When you look at Punisher's first appearance in Spider-Man, he's a guy with a gun trying to get Spider-Man. He's basically Kraven the Hunter with a skull on his thing, who comes
Yeah.
to an agreement with Spidey at the end of like, oh wait, the Jackal was manipulating me.
Yeah.
And you look at a lot of the Mike Baron comics in the 80s and stuff like that. Look, it was a little more violent, but it wasn't when they got into the Garth Ennis Punisher Max series and stuff like that that were brutal and visceral and took it to another level. That's why the character gained the popularity that you now so much disdain. And so the comic book creators themselves who pushed this medium into the darkness and just gleefully run through, yeah, of course you were going to create a character like that. And the whole problem I have with it is critiquing the Punisher while you're publishing Red Band comic books. Uh,
Mm.
Critiquing the Punisher when you gleefully have Deadpool throwing grenades and chopping people's heads off, and oh, our quirky comic where Gwenpool comes back and she's cutting people's heads off. What's the difference? What is the difference? And like you can tell me, oh well, the Punisher's too real because it's a guy with a gun. What is Deadpool? You think people are making a distinction that Deadpool, well, he's got a red mask and he regenerates. He's a guy with a gun. Like
Mhm.
at a certain point, you get to these levels where it just seems like they got that one character. And if you want a character like the Punisher to go away, then you got to make comics less dark. You got to
Yeah.
take these back to a place where we don't have it's a regular occurrence that someone's getting their head lopped off in a comic book. And that's the weirdest thing is I'll see the same crowd of writers who are so vocal that the Punisher sucks also want to critique Batman for letting the Joker out of prison. And
Oh,
so,
there's
okay,
that argument. Yeah.
so what's the answer here?
Yeah.
Batman's an irresponsible jerk because he won't deal with the Joker permanently, but the Punisher's the worst human being ever. But also, isn't it funny when Deadpool kills people and Wolverine can be an Avenger and the Joker can cut people's heads off, but we're still going to publish all this Joker stuff? Like, if you want me to take your complaints about the Punisher serious, then you got to stop having Spidey team up with Deadpool. You got to stop having the Avengers hang out with Wolverine. And you got to stop having that the standard thing that most Marvel heroes do is kill their bad guy. Like that's the biggest issue I have with this is the writers who now act like this character is such an affront to everything that is good and right and moral. Don't write Deadpool then. If you're I'll say this, if you're Mark Waid, who typically I will give Mark Waid credit. Mark Waid always writes characters in a pretty aspirational viewpoint when he writes the big two. His Superman, his Flash, his Batman, when he writes those characters, they typically represent the heroic versions of those characters. A creator like that having an issue with the Punisher, I'll at least give it some credence because you know what? Most of the time when you write characters, they're pretty aspirational, motivational characters.
Yeah.
Some of these other guys, it's like, man, you wrote an X-Men comic where they were mowing their enemies down by the dozen and cracking wise while they were doing so. I want to hear crap from you about why the Punisher is such a disaster. Like that's and I think that's just like he was inevitable. And if you want the solution to Frank Castle to really go away, take comics back to probably where they should be. Take them
Yeah.
back to being comics that are appropriate for 8 to 10 to 12-year-olds, maybe. Have it be that Pixar MCU range of a 5-year-old could watch it, and there's some things maybe that are a little too violent for them, but not too much. And a teenager can read it, and it's serious enough they can get it. And that's what Stan, that's what Jack, that's what those guys did so brilliantly at the beginning, was they understood these are for kids. We're going to put some vocabulary and some things in there that maybe are out of their reach to make them read. We want these to be aspirational. If you really want comics to get back to where they should be, then put that back in. But I just think it's hilarious that on one hand we'll get people who are like, "Oh, Homelander and the Boys is amazing," but that Punisher, just
Yeah, right.
too much. Invincible, Omni Man, it's great. Let's go play
Yeah.
Mortal Kombat, and then but
Yeah.
the Punisher, just I don't know. Like
I
it
don't know.
just it's ridiculous, and I
Like
think we have to
Invincible,
get
they're
back.
literally tearing people in half. And
Yeah,
it's like,
it's where we've got to get back to like again, like this is showing up with modern Disney, right? I, one of my least favorite properties of Disney was the Falcon and the Winter Soldier TV show. I largely think that to me is the low water mark of Marvel. Because one of the dumbest things that show did is it just showed all the inherent inconsistencies that Marvel has. And I think it just perfectly represents. Sam Wilson has this huge issue with John Walker in that show because John Walker's just exerting his authority and breaking foreign barriers and doing whatever he wants. The Dora Milaje show up to do the same thing, and Sam's like, "Oh, do what you got to do." It's like, wait, what are they doing? Right? That's that Carly terrorist kills people, and Sam's like, we can't call them terrorists. But at the same time, at the beginning, he's like wiping people out with impunity who are terrorists, and it's like you guys have to pick what this is supposed to be. But as always, it's interesting for us to see what you
yeah.
guys think below. What do you think about the Punisher? What do you think about the character and where he is? Let us know below, folks. As always, thank you so much for watching. God bless you, and we'll catch you in our next video.